Welcome to Momentum, a motorsports podcast powered by High Gear Success. I'm your host, Heather Wilson Schiltz. Here we share the stories and strategies that keep the world of motorsports moving forward. And I'm excited to chat with Steve Knoble of Knoble Moto. He offers classes and workshops for the DIY mechanic who wants to learn more about repairing and maintaining their motorcycle. And this is done both via YouTube and in person. Plus, he's passionate about getting shop classes back in schools through MotoGo Cleveland. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So let's take a step back. What first got you into motorcycles?
What first got me into motorcycles? There was, growing up, I was a kid and, super into bicycles. It was just kind of that freedom and adventure. And my uncle had a motorcycle and a couple other people did. And they always just had this mystique, So somewhere around 2021 or so, I bought my first one, this little KZ400. And it kind of interests me. And then I got another bike, and then I got involved in racing, drag racing, the HDRA way back when. And man, it kind of just lit a fire, or pressed a button in me. And it has ran a good portion of my personal life for about 20 years. And now it runs my professional life too. So my entire world pretty much revolves around motorcycles. My wife rides too. She's a member of the Cleveland Leaders. So it's a huge portion of our life now. And bicycles, of course, are still there.
What is your professional background then?
So for about 25 years, I did industrial machine repair, or it was referred to as a millwright. Worked in a lot of local stamping plants, worked in some steel fabrication shops, did a lot of heavy equipment stuff, cranes, worked on some high-speed automation in there. I eventually ended up at NASA as a millwright, NASA Glenn Lewis Research Center here in Cleveland. I worked there as a millwright for about 6 years. So I have a pretty strong background in all things mechanical, electrical, and fabrication, just because I went to a trade school for it. And I did it professionally for so long. And of course, motorcycles are just machinery. So they're a lot more fun, but they're still just machinery. So it all just kind of transfers over to it. So actually, before I was at NASA, I worked at Supertrap in research and development for a little while. It was kind of an effort to get into the motorcycle industry and a little bit more of like a passionate field than just steel fabrication or printing ink cartridge labels. And that went for a little while. And then I ended up at NASA, like I was saying, as a millwright, and worked in the wind tunnel there, and then the fabrication division for the testing equipment. And then an opportunity popped up at MotoGo Cleveland to teach a kid's shop class. So I made the transition from there. By that point, Knoble Moto had started on the side. So everything just kind of took a left turn there around 2022. And now I teach kids and teach adults.
So, talk a little bit more about MotoGo Cleveland and what that mission is of that organization.
So MotoGo Cleveland's a nonprofit here in Cleveland, Ohio. It was started by Brian Shaffron and his wife, Molly Vaughn. And the idea is, those two were both teachers by trade. The idea of it was to put tools in kids' hands and let them learn by doing and learn by failing. And it's not just in the sense of trying to churn out motorcycle mechanics. Yes, that's an awesome byproduct of it. But as a teacher, Brian had discovered that once you give kids this shop class experience and teach them to learn by doing, and more importantly, learn by failing, and let them figure out problems, suddenly it changes the perspective they have towards learning. He said, the same kids that took, his little side shop class project, they were more apt to go up and write on the board and answer questions, and they became better students. And they kind of learn that passion for learning. And also they learn those important deductive reasoning skills. They weren't just being taught to the test. So that was the spark behind it. And so what we do now is we are in some local private schools and a couple charter schools and a couple public schools. And we have kids rebuild Honda CB 350s. And the big focus of the thing is to put tools in kids' hands and let them learn by trying, learn by failing, and learn by doing. And as we say, failure is the linchpin of success. You are not going to succeed unless you fail over and over. And as we tell the kids, that is going to be the key to this class. And in the end, each kid gets to kickstart the motorcycle they're working on, or we bring in a functioning one. That way they still get the motorcycle experience, but really it's about teaching them how to learn by doing and building that self-confidence in the problem solving. And some of these kids will never touch a motorcycle again in their life, and that's fine. I hope they ride, but It's really more the how would you say the like I said, that problem solving and deductive reasoning skills that we're really focusing on. And we've already heard from other students that have gone off into college and stuff and discuss how MotoGo either showed them STEM careers, kind of opened their eyes to that, or just helped to give them self confidence to whatever other career they went into. So it's became a very valuable resource, and it's becoming widely popular here in Cleveland. So I'm really lucky to be one of the coaches at MotoGo. So yeah.
I love that. I feel like when I was back in school, I mean, shop classes were not even that common, right? And a lot of schools don't have them
Sure.
today, but a shop class was maybe woodworking or
Mhm.
something, even I feel like the dark room and photography. Like it wasn't anything super technical or mechanical that we were ever working on. So that's a pretty cool
Mhm.
project that these kids get that hands on experience through.
Yes, it really is. And we also have a mini bike program that we launched this year, and we're developing that. And with that, it's actually just the Harbor Freight engines. But we tell kids it's the mini bikes because if you tell them it's a mini bike or a motorcycle, you have their attention. They think they're coming to learn on working on motorcycles, that cool, edgy thing. They don't realize the important life skills they're learning. And if we tell them, oh, well, this engine goes on a pressure washer, they're going to tune out. They don't care. It's now gone to chores that you've lost their interest. So, yeah, so we're trying to make it from those back rooms, from that kind of shadowy thing or that, the path for flunkies and stoners. We're trying to bring this to the forefront, and especially at some of the higher end private schools we're in, showing the schools and the students like these are important skills that are going to uh, change how you address all the problems you encounter in your life.
When did you start working on your own bikes? Was it out of necessity? Was it just wanting to learn how to do it?
Uh, it was financial necessity, and then right from my first bike, I discovered a lot of local shops won't work on stuff that's more than like 7 or 8 years old. I think my first bike was somewhere around 25 years old when I first bought it. So I had no choice in the matter. But growing up in blue collar town, farm town, my dad was a tool and die maker. We always just fix things. We maintain the cars, we maintain the house, whatever it may be. So for me, it was just kind of an easy transition to go from wrenching on cars to wrenching on motorcycles. And then I found out you don't get rust in your eyes like you do on a car. So that's a huge plus.
Do you remember that experience going well when you first started? And what kind of resources did you have to help you along? Or did you not have those resources?
Oh man, we had no resources. It was me and a friend of mine, and we would just kind of trial and error things. And then there was like a motorcycle shop in town, and maybe the guy would give you advice. In hindsight, some of it wasn't great advice. And there was some like old biker dude that lived down the street from my buddy, and we would go ask him, and he would give us well intended advice, but it wasn't always the most solid technical stuff. So it was a lot of just kind of reaching out to people in chit chain, and this is like 2001, so the forums hadn't really hit yet, and of course there was no YouTube yet. And then once forums hit, that was a game changer because now you can network with people that have the same vehicle, and of course YouTube has been a huge resource for people to be able to share knowledge and share info out there. So before it used to be pretty rough, but you figured it out, and you end up with some amazing stories. Yeah.
So you have a YouTube channel, Knoble Moto,
Yes.
and you share a lot of tutorials and how-to videos online. So what inspired you to start sharing those videos?
That started as a side thing from Knoble Moto itself. Knoble Moto started as teaching other people how to fix their motorcycles, and a couple of people had just mentioned, "Hey, you should do YouTube videos." And initially, I was reluctant because I was like, "I don't know anything about this." But the thought was, "Okay, well, I'll do a couple of videos, and people can get accustomed to my teaching style. Maybe they would be more comfortable to sign up for an in-person class." And then it took off. It took a few months, kind of went through COVID, and then all of a sudden it started climbing. And I had a couple parts manufacturers contact me about product placement and stuff, and started networking with people about their videos, and yeah, learn more about filming and editing and lighting. Lighting's a huge thing. Uh, and then just kind of went from there with it. That kind of went off on a side tangent there. Really didn't answer your question too much, or
No, I
maybe I
mean, I
did.
think that's perfect. It's interesting that you started in person and then it led to the online stuff versus I feel like a lot of people maybe start online and then it leads to in-person things. So
Mm.
I think they both play very well together, and that's pretty cool. And I can totally see how, especially during those times when people are looking for something to do, that the channel would really take off. So obviously you had the mechanical skills, but then you had to learn the whole YouTube video side of it, editing, right? The lighting.
Oh yes, that was a curve. Still a curve. Yeah.
What was the biggest challenge in that? And did you record some videos and get done after hours of work and nothing was usable?
There's been lots of recorded stuff that nothing was usable. And some of it I posted anyways. And of course, you go back and you watch your old videos and it's very cringe, as the young kids say. It was just kind of, I tell people when I started out, I knew I didn't know how to make videos. But I knew all the things I didn't like about other people's videos, which were, bad lighting, shaky camera, and inaudible, intros, outros, stuff like that, or just pointless info. So I thought, okay, well, I can definitely light the place up with shop lights, and I'll get a tripod, and I'll just try to speak clearly and enunciate and make sure you can see what we're working on, and focus on the task at hand, not my face. The old joke was the only people tuning in for my face are my mother and my wife. Everyone else wants to see what I'm working on, so I tried to focus on that, and then just kind of learn from there. And YouTube's kind of a small world. You end up meeting people, or people you just know from the motorcycle scene, and you start messaging them and hey, why is this shot bleached out, or how do I fix this, or how do I take this grain out and stuff. And there's been a lot of people. Steven Cinch over at Moto Stories has been very helpful. Mikey Revold at Lowbrow has been hugely helpful. I had a coworker, Kent, who was into photography, was wildly helpful too. So just kind of networking, really, was a lot of it,
How do you decide which topics make it to YouTube versus just things that you're going to keep either for classes or just you need to get something done for yourself and you're not going to record it on YouTube?
It started as just everything I was doing to either my bikes or my wife's bikes. And now I look at the analytics of a lot of the stuff and like what is popular, what isn't. I did a video on gapping piston rings. Nobody's watching that. The videos on changing the oil are wildly popular. So once I realized that, a lot of the simple stuff or the basic stuff was the most popular, I would just start focusing on that. And then, of course, I just keep a notepad in my phone, and I'll be chit-chatting with somebody, or they'll be complaining like, man, my brake lever's sticking. And so I make a mental note of like how to fix a sticky brake lever, So it's a lot of conversations and stuff, and things that people seem confused about, topics that come up in my in-person classes a lot. They'll often lead to videos, if I notice multiple people have been asking about something. So that's usually about it.
You mentioned in-person workshops and events. So do you think that has an impact on motorcycling culture as far as like the community and the hands-on teaching versus just being connected online?
I think it definitely is. A lot of the people that sign up for the classes, there may be some concerns, or they have questions, or they've watched stuff online, but they still want someone to look over their shoulder. Or a lot of it is people are still just unsure with tools and stuff. And I try to use the same teaching philosophy we have with MotoGo of I give people the rack of sockets and I tell them, okay, it's one of these. You're basically telling them you have to figure it out. And with the idea of being confidence building tasks, so they figure out which socket it is. But I'm standing there so they can turn to me and say, is this right? Am I doing this right? So I think a lot of it is just that encouraging words. And then, of course, just the hands-on experience. And like in my engine building classes, I get a lot of people that say, like, I'm interested in doing this, but, I'm interested in putting a big bore kit on my Harley. But, they're nervous because it's an expensive upgrade. It's very expensive if you screw it up. So the fact I'm giving them, an engine to work on or a motorcycle to work on, I tell them, like, it doesn't matter. This stuff is scrap. If you break it, it's okay. So I'm taking that concern and that risk out of it and letting them get their hands dirty. And I think that's been one of the biggest things that's drawn people in. Yeah.
What is the most common mistake that you see people make in terms of repair, whether it's on their own or in your classes? Like, is there something that happens over and over again?
Turning bolts the wrong way is probably a huge one. We fix a lot of broken bolts. That's probably the biggest ones, is just that. and then people get nervous and then they skip basic steps or they get in a rush. So a lot of it is probably taking their time and slowing down and being meticulous about things. Those are probably the two biggest concerns I run into a lot with people.
And I'm married to a mechanic, so I get to hear about a lot of these things. I will admit that I don't have a lot of mechanical knowledge because I'm married to a mechanic. So it's one of those things I didn't have to learn out of necessity, and my dad could work on my stuff before too. But I feel like one of the things that I always hear from him is people like over tightening stuff.
Yes. Yes, that has been a problem. That is a problem in all kinds of worlds. That was a problem when I worked in factories. Guys would love to pull on stuff and just, no, when I tighten it, it won't come off.
Yeah.
Calm down, dude.
And then
there's
things
more
don't
specs.
function correctly when you over tighten them.
Yes, or you try and take it apart and it won't come apart, or they torque down one bolt and now they can't get the rest of the bolts in. I run into that a lot. So yeah, it is a lot of people now are understanding torque specs, and in their defense, a lot of people were just never shown this stuff, or they just don't have that hands-on experience. I know looking back, there were so many things I used to do wrong. And, whether I learned on motorcycles or on industrial equipment, like, oh, you do it this way, it works better, or it extends the life of the component or whatever it may be. You learn from your mistakes. So
Absolutely. Out of all the projects that you've done, is there one that has pushed your skills or maybe your patience the most?
Patience, everything I ever did working on sport bikes would push my patience. When I was into sport bikes, I loved the things, but God, they were a nightmare to work on. Lots of tiny hidden screws that were very hard to get your hands in there. I say as far as testing abilities, probably some engine building stuff, and it's stuff I technically knew on my own, but of course, when you're the one swiping the credit card, it makes it a little more nerve-wracking. That's probably been the big things, and then trying to modify bikes to do things they were not intended to, or something like that. Taking old bikes and making them actual scramblers, and that's always kind of a test of the patience there when you're basically trying to improve or change something, because you're reverse engineering everything and then trying to figure out, will this work? Is this going to create another weak point down the road, or how will this backfire on me?
Have you done much fabrication as far as modifying bikes, or is it mostly simple kind of installs?
Most of my YouTube videos are simple installs, a lot of bolt-on stuff. I'm a pretty competent fabricator and pretty semi-capable machinist. So I've definitely done some modifications of just different mounts for things, or fabricating this or that. I haven't done like a full-on digger type chopper, long bike chopper type thing yet. But I worked for a little while at Gasbox where we were welding frames and stuff. So I'd say, yeah, I'm pretty versed in it, though I haven't done a whole lot of just full fabrication projects beginning to end of full bike builds. Mostly just because opportunity hasn't arose. And then of course you run into that thing of choppers of, man, they look cool, but what do you do with them? So I haven't built one for that reason, because we live in Ohio and we have potholes.
Yeah.
Looks like it's going to be rough.
Not the most comfortable things, and they're a lot of money to just look at. So
yes, but they look cool. I love them. I'm a huge fan.
How do you approach problem solving when something doesn't go as planned, either for yourself or when you're working with other people? Like, what are your words of advice?
Always step back and take a breath at it. 9 times out of 10, I found when I'm struggling with something, if I walk away from it for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or maybe even the next day, I come back to it with a fresh set of eyes and new patience, maybe a cup of coffee. Suddenly the problems often seem a little more clear. A lot of times when you're getting frustrated, you cannot figure it out. There's a whole thing with your brain of adrenaline, and then your frontal lobe stops working and stuff. So I think patience and stepping away from it. And a lot of times, I'll just go watch other people's YouTube videos on stuff and just see, like, how did this guy do it, or how did that guy do it? Maybe somebody will mention something, or somebody just says, hey, I reach my hand in this way and I use this tool, and the dots connect in your brain and the lights come on, and we suddenly realize, like, oh, this is how it's going to be done. So always step back. Getting frustrated will never make it go better.
I think that's great advice, and that's definitely true for a lot of things, not just wrenching on bikes, but just taking a pause and then coming back to it later helps a lot of things.
Absolutely, yes.
What is one tool that you couldn't live without? Like, what's your go-to?
The go-to, man, I use the torque wrench a lot more than I used to. So I'd say that would probably be a big one. I'm not a big fan of impacts and stuff. I still like the feel of the actual ratchets and sockets, but impact drivers when it comes to old bikes, those are wildly popular. And then probably the torque wrench for putting it all back together.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah.
Are there any specialty tools that you've had to or wanted to acquire over the years?
Larger socket sets. I've got a lot of drills and taps. That's pretty handy. Easy outs for removing broken bolts because it will happen. And then a lot of specialty sockets and stuff has kind of been the big things there. Those are the first ones that jump into my brain. And probably a lot of just machinist type tools of, small files and, like I said, thread chasers and items like that.
Are you
Probably been the biggest
particular
ones.
as far as brands go? Like, are you a brand loyal guy when it comes to tools, or anything will work?
Nope, anything will work. I've, I have some high end stuff and I have some Harbor Freight stuff, and I broke all of them. Some of them more than others, but yeah, I'm pretty whatever gets the job done works. And I joke I've also inherited two grandfathers worth of tools. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
have pretty much every brand known to man of something, and it all works good or poorly depending on the application.
So, your shop setup, do you have a shop or garage at home, or is there some place local that you go to work on your bikes?
I'm set up in my own garage, and I use that a lot for my own maintenance. And of course, I like to shoot videos in there. And I'm also a member of a community motorcycle garage called Skidmark Garage here in Cleveland, Ohio. That's where my in-person classes are at. And then a lot of times I will be doing fabrication stuff up there just because I have more space and there's less fire risks and things like that because it's just a larger open industrial space. So usually it's one of those two. It's usually my go-to for it, depending on the project.
So, I'm familiar with Skidmark, but for those that may not be familiar, can you kind of explain what a community garage is?
We say it's like a gym, but for motorcycles. And if you choose, all are welcome is the big thing at the garage. No douchebags. But if you choose to be a member, you can just pay your monthly or annual fee, and you can keep your motorcycle there. There's lifts, lathes, welders, tire machines, all the tools you could ever imagine, even the specialty tools. And usually between that and then the community that is Skidmark, you can solve most problems that you'll come across with on your motorcycle. And it's a pretty verse community. We have people that swear by mini bikes. We have Harley guys, sport bikers, vintage Goldwing guys. So no matter what bike somebody has, somebody there has some hands-on experience with it.
Well, and I think that's great too, not only for the community aspect that you get when you go to places like that, but also like not everybody may have a garage to work in or have the tools. So I think that's a really cool option for a lot of people.
Sure, absolutely. And it becomes a hangout. Like before I was doing the classes, I used to do my winter maintenance up there just because like it was more fun than doing it there with a group of people than it was working in the garage by myself. And of course it's heated, unlike my last garage. So, that's nice in the winter.
When you're not in the garage, what is your go-to ride or escape? Like, what do you like to do in your free time?
The bicycles are still a huge part of my life. We have Ray's Mountain Bike Park here in Cleveland, Ohio. So there's usually bicycles. My wife and I camp a lot. So whenever we get some opportunity to travel or go camping, things like that. Of course, hiking, stuff like that. Usually anything outdoors, naturey, we're game for it. And of course, our
What
small dog that,
level of camping are you at? Because I'm on glamping level. So
yeah.
I'm not a tent camper, but
We bounce between glamping and tenting, if that makes sense. I've done the full spectrum of it when I was younger, and then I really hadn't camped in a while. And then my wife had mentioned I've never been camping, so we went camping, and now it's a thing. So probably fancy tenting is our preferred choice. So still a tent, but we prefer someplace that has running water.
mhm.
And bathrooms is always huge. Though we've done the ultra primitive too on hip camp, but yeah.
That's cool. Do you have any favorite places that you've traveled to, whether on a motorcycle or just to go camping?
On a motorcycle, the Smoky Mountains are always top. Just like West Virginia, North Carolina, Western Virginia, Eastern Kentucky. It's amazing down there. They don't have road engineers. They've just paved goat paths through the hills. So it's these amazing motorcycle roads with these crazy switchbacks, and it's not polluted. Sometimes I even tell people I don't want to ruin it and make it too popular, but it's not polluted with like chain restaurants and massive sprawling strip malls and stuff. It's
Hmm.
still very pure. And of course, there's Western Pennsylvania, which isn't far away, of Allegheny National Forest. That's great camping and motorcycling. Pretty much wherever there's hills and mountains, we're there. I've ridden on the West Coast a little bit through the Sierra Nevadas. That's pretty amazing too. So,
So, what are the current bikes in your garage that you and your wife
uh,
have?
I have a 22 Harley Lowrider ST. It's usually my main bike and my traveler. And I currently have a 1970 BSA 441 Victor, which tests my patience on a regular basis. And then I have, or my wife has a 2012 883 Iron Sportster. And those are the functioning ones. And then, of course, I have this old Kawasaki at Skidmark that is the class bike. And then I have some Harley engines in there too. So that's the current rotation. Yeah.
Do you buy and sell bikes a lot to kind of work on project bikes?
Not as much as I used to. I found the V twin market has been very huge. As far as YouTube videos, aftermarket parts, just the popularity. So I've really kind of stuck with that. I had Dyna before I had this M8 Softail. There's probably a Sportster in my near future for a project bike. So that's really been the focus of it. I used to buy and sell a lot more when I was into vintage bikes and cafe racers, but kind of throttled it back a little bit on that and have more focused stuff now.
Is there a dream project that's still on the list?
There's probably like 20 of them. There's always I want to do like a BMX chopper. Long raked out chopper would be cool. Of course, dirtsters, scramblers, enduros, big tours, FXR shovel heads. Like there's always something. There's a million. It's just a matter of time and square footage and money. Usually time and money.
What is next? What are your future plans for Knoble Moto?
The next big plans that are on the horizon are I've expanded into technical writing. I did a little bit of technical writing for Babcock's Media, and I've done some technical video productions. So I've been expanding more into that. Reaching out to smaller companies and saying, "Hey, you have a product. I have video skills. I have a ton of technical info." So doing install videos or just product explanations or literally writing the instructions for companies, which has been pretty popular with some of the upstart companies, and just kind of basically helping companies that have good products, but maybe they don't have the time or the resources or whatever to put out that good how-to video that goes with it. Because I learned, I was at Super Trap, that a lot of time and money and resources went into just customer service, and a lot of it was often people just didn't understand the instructions or they weren't sure. So I feel that's a big hole in the power sports market. A lot of companies don't have great install instructions for whatever reason. So trying to fill that gap. It helps people, it helps companies, and also it's, income.
Well, and I think too, the engineers that design the products aren't necessarily the best people to be writing the instructions for the people on the receiving end. It usually doesn't work out that well. So you need somebody to kind of be
Often,
that barrier or that link.
yeah, the smooth explainer.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So somebody that has that time in front of people and stuff is a very valuable thing. Because yes, a lot of people have the technical knowledge, and then when you actually have them explain it, they freeze or they aren't sure what to say or they talk in circles, or some people just don't like being on camera. So there's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm. What's next on the horizon as far as the YouTube channel?
Mostly repair and maintenance as far as my own stuff. I just partnered with Dennis Kirk, and I've been doing some videos for them. I don't think any of them have posted yet, but trust me, they're on the horizon. And as far as my stuff goes, my own YouTube channel, it's really just going to continue with a lot of like the basic maintenance and, common upgrades, things like that. common repair points that I get a lot of questions about. I've started borrowing some of my friends' bikes to, do a lot more repair videos on, Heritage Softails and Dyna Classic, and then a Street Bob, and my bike's Road Glide, things like that. Just so I can get more of that technical knowledge out to people, because that seems to be the most popular thing. So I'm just going to keep focusing on that for a while.
Perfect. Well, tell people where they can connect with you online.
You can find me on my website at knoblemoto.com. That's KNOBLEMOTO.com. And of course, I'm on all the social media platforms, but Instagram and Facebook, Knoble_Moto. Instagram and Facebook are the two popular ones. And then, of course, YouTube, which is just /Knoble Moto. Pretty much if you find one of them, they all link together. You should connect the dots there.
Perfect. And I will link those in the show notes as well so people can easily find them. And then they can find info on your in-person classes as well, correct, on your website. And those take place in Cleveland, Ohio.
Yes. Yeah. Everything from basic maintenance. I have a carburetor class, electrical class. There's a MIG welding class, engine building. Sometimes I do brakes and suspension. It's kind of hit and miss on that popularity. But welding, engine building, and basic maintenance are very popular. So, electrical.
Well, thank you for joining me, and thanks to everybody for tuning in to Momentum. This has been a production of High Gear Success. If you want to connect or recommend a guest, head to MomentumMotorsportsPodcast.com. Until next time, keep the momentum rolling.